Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new module about bones. We're going to begin this video with some heart math meditation and then talk about some broader philosophical concepts that relate to yoga, bones, our anatomy, and also about the properties of bones and the skeletal system. But let's begin first with just centering, taking a moment, tuning in. So when you're ready, you can either close your eyes or have a soft gaze, become comfortable, and tune your awareness into your breath. Begin by just sensing your breath in this moment. And as you sense your breath, you can feel that even eyes open or closed, you're bringing your awareness more internal into the sensations within your own system. And as we do this, it's a process of turning inwards, seeing ourselves in this moment. And we can do this through the lens of how our breath is right now. We just observe. And we observe the quality of sensation that by just directing the awareness within, we have more connection with. Perhaps begin to have a sense of the movement of the respiratory diaphragm, the movement of the abdominal muscles as they relate to breath, sensing the parts of the body that are making contact with the earth, a chair, that are providing support. And when you're ready, begin to bring your awareness into your heart. And again, we just begin with awareness and with sensing. We place gentle attention there. And we can feel the tissue surrounding the heart. And with the breath, as we inhale, it's as if the heart itself could breathe and expands gently. And with an exhalation, a softening. As we listen, what does our heart need? What will support us in this moment? And create an image. See something that brings you that felt sense of support, nourishment, gratitude, appreciation. And as you hold that image, breathe that feeling into your heart. And remain present with that for a couple more breaths. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Okay, so let's begin the lecture. Okay. So, as I said, today we're going to be talking about the properties of bones and the skeletal system. We'll begin with some yogic philosophy and also some somatic understanding around the skeletal system and the mind of the system, how we relate to our bones somatically via sensation, and the understanding that our skeletal system bears weight, it transmits force, and it provides protection. So let's first talk just about the path of Raja Yoga. And Raja Yoga and the concept of the eight limb path of Ashtanga Yoga are the same thing. They are a particular path in yoga that follows this understood journey from that which is gross, more obvious, to that which is more subtle. And so, as we know, the path is yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, and those are the more outer practices. And as we move over from pranayama to pratyahara, we begin the more inner and subtle practices of pratyahara, which is sense withdrawal, dharana, which is concentration, dhyana, which is meditation, and samadhi, which is absorption. The sutra that we will be reflecting on is Sutra 2.54, and it talks about pratyahara, that the senses are directed to focus inwardly on the mind itself. And so that is the process of pratyahara, where we start to withdraw our awareness from the outer world and we quiet the senses and we reflect within on the mind. And as we have talked about in previous lectures, where is the mind? And we can say that the mind lives within the whole body. Through the process of interoception, we can sense more clearly the information from our self somatically as to how the mind has distributed itself within all of our tissues. I'll go back. Oops. We'll stay with this about the mind. And as we've talked about the mind being throughout the whole body. And in Bonnie Bainbridge's work that we looked at when we talked about muscles, she looks at the mind of a system. And just as the mind of the muscular system is about doing, the bones are about being. So it's important that we aren't pulled into the belief that one is better than the other, that being is more important than doing, or doing is more important than being, because they're both really essential for our balanced existence. However, we definitely live in a culture where there's a lot more emphasis placed on doing than there is on being. And we can really see this clearly in the evolution of yoga in the West, in that how most of the West believes what yoga is simply the practice of asana, of doing something and doing something with our bodies, where asana, as we know, is just a piece of the practice and a part of the journey. But, when people say to us, like, what kind of yoga do you practice? What they're often meaning is what shapes do you make with your body? What sequences do you practice? Um, but what we know is that we keep coming back to this. Sthira Sukham Asanam. A yoga posture has the opposing qualities of stability and ease, physically, mentally, and spiritually. And asana, postures, are shapes we make with the body. Now, what makes these shapes into asana, however, is this practice, this exploration of Sthira Sukha, and Sthira Sukha brought into action, right? So, what we can really say is that asana is a reflection and it's an examination of how we take action. It's an analysis of our personal experience of how we take action. And what we know is that for every action, there is a reaction. Something happens. There is an outcome. And this also includes choices of non-action. But at the heart of it, what asana becomes is a very personal process of refining how we take action, because how we take action on the mat, when used through this lens, can really inform how we take action in all situations, on the mat and certainly off the mat. So the book, the Bhagavad Gita, is considered one of the great sacred texts of India, and it is the synthesis of Indian religious thought. And the story of the Gita really, at the heart of it, wrestles with the concept of taking action. And so, according to the Bhagavad Gita, one should take action, but with a detached attitude and without attachment to the results. And so, from the Gita, right action is essentially acting selflessly and dedicating the fruits of one actions to the divine. And this concept is often referred to in the karmic yoga path, where the focus is action itself and not personal gain from it. But here are some of the excerpts from the Gita. And so chapter 2, verse 47 says, "You have the right to perform your prescribed duty, but you are not entitled to the fruits of action. Never consider yourself to be the cause of the results of your activities, nor be attached to inaction." These are deep concepts, but they really reside at the heart of the yoga path, the examination of action. Bhagavad Gita 4:18. Those who see action in inaction and inaction are truly wise among humans. Although performing all kinds of actions, they are yogis and masters of all their actions. And this really speaks to Sthira Sukha, that opposing qualities existing simultaneously. So, why I bring this up is that, as I said, we use asana as an exploration of right action, of Sthira Sukha. And when to reference this back in terms of the mind of the system and anatomy, the experience that we are balancing too on a very anatomical level as we practice asana is the activation of our muscles with the alignment of our bones to receive gravity. balancing these very different elements in our body. And that really equates to what happens in terms of a blending of effort and ease. And we'll continue to explore that concept more and more as we work through this module together. Ultimately, we want to remember that the definition of yoga is that yoga is the cessation of the fluctuations of the mind. And so, as we travel deeper into our system and explore our bones, it's important to remember that at the heart, yoga is an inward practice that cultivates the subtle and the unseen. And we can say philosophically that yoga is a process from moving from that which is more gross, obvious, tangible, blatant, to that which is more subtle to help us arrive at stillness, right? It is the cessation, stillness of the fluctuations of the mind. And so, in essence, yoga is a journey into stillness. To arrive at stillness, we must become more subtle in our awareness and in our understanding. We can say that the path of Raja Yoga, we are awakening that which is unseen and unfelt, using the body as a vehicle to hold our attention and our awareness to ultimately still the mind. And this allows us to experience the truth of who we are. Okay, so now let's talk a little more about the quality of bones. As we said in the past, muscles are loud and bones are quiet. And so, what do I mean by that? Muscles and the fascia surrounding them have a loud volume in terms of sensation, right? They give us a lot of feedback as we move through our environment in terms of we register the sensation of stretch and soreness, tension, contraction, fatigue. All of this is a lot of sensory information that our muscles give to us. Bones, however, are much quieter. Their volume in terms of sensation is very low, unless they're injured, of course. And you have to direct your awareness much more internally to sense your bones. To sense the bones, we must practice pratyahara, in which we quiet the senses, when we withdraw the senses more internally away from the outer world. And the pratyahara, the practice of pratyahara is essential to enter into the experience of being and not doing. And through the practice of pratyahara, we develop what we can call two-way sight. So the stronger that we become in our ability to connect with interoception at any moment, to feel ourselves as we're out in the world, we're able to really see the one who sees. And this is a really important practice and quality for teachers to develop because we don't want our teaching to be a performance. We want our teaching to be our practice. And the only way that our teaching is our practice is that we can remain embodied and connected internally with the experience that we're having in the moment, with our breath, with our sensations, with our quality of being in the moment as we are speaking to a group of people, speaking to one other person, being in relationship with the world. this is what developing Pratyahara does. It allows us what I call two-way sight. I see myself as much as I see you in the moment. We can say that the force of gravity and weight arrive in our bones and is felt as pressure. And so bones are perceived in a sensory form through the experience of pressure, right? This would be like someone lying on a hard floor and feeling their heels, their sacrum, their elbows, places, their shoulder, the back of their head are touching the floor. Those are points of pressure. And we have nerve endings in our bones, and the sensation we're able to perceive, as I said, is that of pressure. And this is different than any sensation we receive from our muscular system. So let's take a moment, and I'm going to ask you to do something. I'm not going to do it with you, but I'm just going to talk you through it. I'm going to have you come to standing. If you're on a hard floor, that really helps. Or you could take off socks and feel your feet on the floor. I want you to close your eyes and see for a moment if you can, as you're standing in postural neutral in Tadasana, if you can tune past the sensation of your muscles and listen for the experience in your bones of that of weight and pressure, most clearly arriving into your feet. And so can you feel the force of gravity being transmitted through your bones? And see if you can really allow, as you align yourself with gravity, to have that sensation of gravity traveling through the bones as you allow your muscles to relax around the bones. Notice the sensation. And now for a moment, hang your head forward, change your posture, perhaps slump a bit. And notice the difference as to how this may feel and whether this feels balanced or not, and how that changed the sensation of muscle versus bone, and how maybe your muscles are working a little harder now because your skeletal system is not receiving the force of gravity as efficiently. But notice how you have to really tune in to this sensory information. It's there for us, but until we really direct our awareness and our mind into our bones, we're often not sensing this quiet sensation and return back to a balanced postural neutral, relaxing the muscles. And you see, the more that you tune into it, the more you're aware of it. And so a really important question as you can sit back down is, what am I sensing in this moment? Am I sensing my muscles? Am I sensing my bones? Can I tell the difference? So now that you're seated again, I'm going to ask you to feel the clothes on your body that you're wearing right now. And before I said this, were you sensing your clothes? And what happens with our bodies is that our nervous system adapts in terms of how much information we can process at once. And often when we receive the same sensory feedback all the time, such as our clothes on our body, we adapt to it. And it's no longer part of our conscious awareness unless we really tune into it. And so in our practice and as yoga teachers, we are really directing ourselves and others into sensing the body and sensing the breath. And we use sensation, we use awareness to help train the mind to be present. We can use the body as a vehicle via our 8 senses to keep us present and aware in the moment. And I love that there is a great understanding now that there are 8 senses, not just 5. And all the new ones that have really been added to the list are the vestibular sense of balance, proprioception, where our body is in space, and interoception, those the internal signalings within our system. And so as teachers, we really want to investigate and direct our students' awareness to sensation by giving it a voice. And this is not to say that we should assume that how we experience sensation is exactly the same as others, but there are some universal understandings that can help you guide yourself and others into the world of sensation so that sensation becomes a place to focus the mind. And this, of course, helps to really develop interoception. And when we harness our awareness of our senses, we can then also retreat more deeply within. So, if we're able to orient ourselves into our senses, we can also then make choices around how to quiet the senses and to become more internal. All right, so now let's move on to some of the principal biological properties of the skeletal system. And so the major ones are that the skeletal system bears load, it transmits force, and it creates protection with limited amounts of deformation. All right, so number 1, the skeletal system bears weight. So the force of gravity, which is experienced as weight, and the weight of our body is translated through our bones. Muscles move bones and hold joints in place, but our bones evolved to bear weight, not muscles. Keep doing that, sorry. So, Tadasana. Tadasana anatomically is our skeletal system's postural neutral when we are upright. And when our postural neutral is balanced, our joints are aligned. And the force of gravity, as well as our own body weight, travels through the bones and the joints. And there must be balanced activation of the length tension relationship of muscles around joints for our joints to be able to stack in alignment so that gravity can move through them in an efficient way. And what really influences this is what we call the fascial trains. And this is just simply nothing that you have to memorize, but something that I just want you to see is that we have these fascial pathways throughout our body. And the myofascial system wraps the skeletal system and it creates a container with specific pathways which allows force to travel through the skeletal system along a continuum. And these long lines are mapped as fascial pathways, are also called fascial trains. And they are pathways that connect different parts of the body through the fascia. And these lines of tension and pull play a role in coordinating movement and transmitting forces throughout the body. And these lines help to explain how different parts of the body are interconnected and how dysfunction in one area can affect another. And so here are some of the most common and superficial fascial trains. So we have the superficial back line, and this line runs from the plantar fascia of the feet up the back of the legs, along the spine, and over the head to the brow region. So it comes all the way over to the brow. And it's thought to play a role in upright posture. And imbalance in this pathway is associated with conditions like low back pain, hamstring tightness, plantar fasciitis, and many other things. Here is an image of the superficial front line. Move this out of the way. And the superficial front line runs from the top of the feet up the front of the legs, through the core muscles, and along the neck to the forehead. And it's considered important for maintaining an upright posture and may be linked to conditions such as anterior pelvic tilt and neck pain. So we could imagine that. And then next, we have the lateral line. And the lateral line travels from the side of the foot up the leg, across the hip, up to the side of the torso, and to the skull. And it's associated with side-to-side movements and stability, and may be relevant in addressing issues like hip pain, hip hike, scoliosis, one side of the spine longer than the other. And so it's just important to understand that the skeletal system does have these connective tissue pathways that really connect bone to bone to bone and make a lot of our movements either functional or dysfunctional, depending on what's going on in these fascial trains. And it's something that we will explore much more in the 300-hour level course of when we really look a little deeper into the fascial matrix. Another thing that's really important to understand around bones and joints is just how affected they are, of course, by the balance of length and tension of muscles around a joint. And so here, this man is doing frog pose, but he's showing it on a way where he's got his knees on blankets and he's sliding his knees open and pulling the legs back together. So really working in external rotation of the hips. He's working adduction and abduction. So those muscles that are both creating length and tension to support the hips. One of the things that is just sort of a side note, and we'll talk more about later, is here you can see as he comes into external rotation and adduction, what is happening to his core? He's getting really pulled into extension. You can see his low back is beginning to drop, and that's very common, right? We can imagine that in our own bodies, that when we come into external rotation, the spine is often pulled into extension, and when we come into internal rotation of the limbs, the spine is typically pulled into flexion. And so we would want to bring awareness to that so as not to collapse. But the main point of this slide is that joints function well when there is a balance of both strength and length surrounding joints to help the skeletal system to stack efficiently. And we can see that a lot when it comes to these sort of somewhat opposite constitutional body types of like bulking, where someone has so much bulk and concentric contraction within their muscular system, or the opposite, like an amazing amount of flexibility. And so, if someone is always training concentric contraction and bulking, or the opposite, overstretching, and creating excess flexibility, the skeletal system has the potential to be impacted negatively in its relationship with gravity and stable, efficient joints, where we could see perhaps um, when there's a lot of concentric contraction and bulking, we can create a lot of compression around joints, or excess flexibility, a lack of stability within joints. So we come back to the concept of our baseline neutral, right? Tadasana. And if your baseline neutral requires a lot of muscular activity to support your skeletal system, the body will begin to morphologically change the quality of muscle tissue so that it can expend less energy. And it does this by calcifying muscle tissue. Calcium begins to accumulate within muscles that work all the time in an attempt to support the skeletal system, and they makes those muscles harder and they become more bone-like. They have less contractile properties and they become much stiffer. And this is called metabolic reprogramming. We talked about this before, and it's where cells adjust to different environmental conditions, nutrient availability, and functional demands by rewiring metabolism to suit the current situation. And this is, a clear example of how our body is always attempting to be more efficient. And this is a way that we become more efficient in that we expend less energy because we're having to do the work of supporting our skeleton. But the good news is that metabolic reprogramming within cells is adaptable. So if proper movement via stretch and contraction is restored to the tissue, and the tissue can change again. So with increased circulation, hydration, nourishment, the muscle and connective tissue can become more supple or strengthen. And with training, we can learn to adjust our skeleton in alignment with gravity so that the bones and joints can stack more efficiently. When our bones bear weight and receive gravity, we are energetically much more efficient. And this has a significant impact on the quality of our overall prana. Okay, next, the skeletal system transmits force. And so the leverage to move our bones through space is generated by our muscles, tendons, and their surrounding fascia. But the force itself is transferred and transmitted through our bones. And so for me to hold a ball and pull my arm back, my whole body back, and then move the arm forward, all of that is muscle moving bone. But how, in that moment where the ball releases from my hand and force has been transferred into the ball, that comes from the bones. Okay, so the skeletal system transmits force from one part of the body to another, bone to bone via the joints. And this transfer of force through the joints is made possible because of ligaments, right? Which are tough connective tissue that connect bones together at the joints. And they allow for stability and for controlled movement. And we'll look more at ligaments in the next video. And the last property of the skeletal system is that the skeletal system evolved as protection. And so the skeletal system also, of course, protects certain areas of the body, organs, our brain, our spinal cord, from mechanical forces that could damage them. And this harder tissue of bone can receive and absorb a limited amount of force without deformation, without changing um, its its rigidity and its support. So thank you very much. And we will continue to explore bones and the skeletal system together.